Let's take a look at some schools of economic thought and how their policies can impact policy decisions. In modern economics, individual economists are often have varying views of the economy, how the economy actually works. When many economists share a basic view of how the economy works, they form groups of like-minded economists called schools. These groups are informal, and individuals participate informally in them through lectures, writings, and meetings. The two basic schools of economic thought have been the freshwater economists and saltwater economists. The terms come from the area of country where these particular ideas dominate. The so-called freshwater school is centered around the University of Chicago, and Chicago, you may know, is on Lake Michigan, a body of fresh water, and hence the term freshwater. The saltwater economists are centered in universities on either the east coast or the west coast of the United States near the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Let's take a brief moment to look at the basic ideas of each group. Let's look at the freshwater economists first. All believe in a self-correcting nature of the economy, that depressions, recessions will come to an end very quickly and are not going to be very severe. Wages, interest rates, and prices adjust quickly to changing economic conditions. Governments should not intervene in the economy if at all possible. The government should always have a balanced budget and no deficit spending. Unemployment, according to freshwater economists, will rise quickly and decline quickly in a recession. The government intervention is to blame if it does not change quickly enough. Individuals are rational in their economic judgments, and some economists may even argue that Say's law does operate. Now let's look at the beliefs of saltwater economists. Keynes generally believed in the self-correcting nature of the economy, but argued there may be times when the economy is not self-correcting. That is, wages, prices, and interest rates may not be very flexible, or they are sticky. Unemployment may be high and last a long time. The government may need to intervene in the economy to create demand through spending and tax rates, and government deficit spending is okay in the short run. Individuals may not be entirely rational in their economic decisions. That is, they may be governed by what Keynes called animal spirits. Aggregate supply is not as important as aggregate demand. In this lecture, we're going to look at some of these ideas of various groups of economists. One important concept is the wage-price spiral. The concept works this way. Workers receive an increase in wages. Since their wages are the biggest cost of the firm, any increase in wages cause the prices of goods produced by the firms to increase. However, since workers buy the products directly or indirectly from the firm, the increase in the prices of the goods cause the real wage to decrease, and workers demand higher wages, which increases wages again. However, the firms will then in turn increase the prices of their goods. This is a circle that continues on forever until something happens, like a recession comes along. The wage-price spiral also works in reverse. Firms decrease the wages of their workers. Since the wages are the biggest cost of firms, any decrease in wages will cause the prices of goods produced by the firms to decrease. However, since workers buy the products either directly or indirectly, the decrease in prices of the goods will cause the firms to cut their wages. The cutting of the wages will cause the prices to decrease even more. Once again, this can go on forever in a reverse direction, with prices decreasing and wages decreasing alternatively. Full employment is where all the company's resources are being used to their maximum. Full employment is where the economy should be for optimal performance. Remember, the natural rate of unemployment is the rate of unemployment where there is no cyclical unemployment, only seasonal, structural, and frictional unemployment. In this part of the lecture, we'll look to see how an economy adjusts itself back to full employment. We look at how the freshwater economists suggest is the best way for the economy to return to full employment, as well as how the saltwater economists suggest the best way for the economy to return to full employment. Before starting on the economics of returning to full employment, let's take a few minutes to review the graph. The horizontal axis represents real GDP, and as one moves from left to right, real GDP gets larger. The vertical axis, the up and down axis, measures price level, and as one moves up the axis, the price level climbs higher. Next, we add three curves. The AD curve is the short-run aggregate demand curve, AS is our short-run aggregate supply curve, and the long-run aggregate supply curve is the vertical line. There are several things to notice. First, the point where the short-run aggregate supply curve is equal to the short-run aggregate demand curve creates an equilibrium GDP, labeled GDP-FE for GDP for full employment on the graph, and an equilibrium price level, PFE, or the price level at full employment. The equilibrium point is also assumed to lie on the long-run aggregate supply curve. The point where the long-run aggregate supply curve touches the real GDP axis is the full employment GDP. This is where anyone who wants a job has one, and any employment is due solely to frictional, structural, or seasonal unemployment. The price level associated with the full employment is PFE. Now workers are able to negotiate a wage increase. Since increases in wages cause the cost of the goods produced by the firm to increase, the aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. The result of the shift is that the price level will increase from PFE to PF1, and the GDP to increase from GDP PF to GDP1. This means in practical terms that the economy has entered a recession. The question needs to be answered: how can the economy get out of the recession? The two schools of thoughts can each offer a suggestion. In the next two slides, we'll see what freshwater and saltwater economists offer us. Freshwater economists offer us a simple solution: do nothing. Let's look at the logic of this suggestion for dealing with our problem of decreasing GDP and high price level. The freshwater economists offer the following argument. When prices increase, producers will cut back on the number of workers they use to produce goods and services. As workers are laid off, the producers will say to remaining workers, if you take a pay cut, you can keep your job, or if you cut your hours, you can keep your job. As a result of workers being laid off, having their pay cut, or working fewer hours, the cost of labor to the firms will decrease. As a result of the decrease in wages, the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. The price level will decline to PFE, the full employment equilibrium price level, and the GDP will increase from GDP1 to the full employment GDP, GDP-FE. Another solution to the problem, perhaps favored by saltwater economists, is to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. The aggregate demand curve can be shifted to the right by increasing government spending. If the government spends additional money, the aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. Notice, however, there's a cost to this policy, namely that the price level increases from P1 to P2. In short, there are two ways that we can deal with this situation when the economy is below full employment. One, cut wages to shift the aggregate supply curve to the right, or to increase government spending to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. If we choose to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, we will pay the cost of having higher prices. Finally, let's look at how changes in the economy impact the money supply and, by extension, investment. On the screen there are three graphs. The graph on the left is the aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph. Notice on this graph the short-run aggregate supply curve AS0 has already been shifted to the left as a result of higher wages. In the middle is the money supply and the money demand graph, and on the right is the interest rate and the investment graph. Freshwater economists argue that there is no need for the President, the Congress, or the Federal Reserve to intervene in the economy because the economy is self-correcting. Let's take a look at how the economy self-corrects. Let's start on the left. Remember that the aggregate supply curve has already shifted to the left as a result of increased wages paid to labor. Firms facing higher wages begin to lay off workers and encourage workers to either work fewer hours or take pay cuts to keep their job. As you may remember, the net result of workers being laid off, taking lower wages, and working fewer hours causes the aggregate supply curve to shift to the right. Since workers are earning less money, their demand for money is also decreasing. The decrease in demand for money causes the demand for money curve to shift to the left. The shift to the left of the money demand curve results in a lower equilibrium interest rate. The lower interest rate causes firms to increase their investment. An increase in investment causes GDP to increase. Also, you may remember that the investment by firms causes the production function to shift upward, increasing both the amount of labor employed and their wage rate. Thus, our economy returns back to full employment and higher wages.